The Toronto Blue Jays. 1. Call to Action 87 calls for public education to spread the national story of Aboriginal athletes in history. Even if the Blue Jays have not gone into direct production of educational materials relating to Indigenous athletes, there is still an indirect consequence to their direct involvement with Indigenous communities and in supporting Indigenous-led initiatives, the wider promotion of knowledge and appreciation of Indigenous cultures and histories. The 88th Call of Action advocates for Aboriginal long-term athlete development and funding of the North American Indigenous Games. Indigenous Rookie League of the Jays Care Foundation is a direct answer to the call and gives Indigenous youth a chance to participate in baseball, acquire athletic skills, and form community bonds. It not only advances physical exercise, but also champions Indigenous athlete development and growth. Call to Action 89 advocates for the amendment of the Physical Activity and Sport Act to ensure policies are inclusive of Aboriginal peoples. The Jays Care Foundation's initiatives, including the Indigenous Rookie League, align with this call by creating inclusive sports programs that reflect Indigenous cultures and traditions, thereby promoting equitable access to sports and recreation. Call to Action 90 speaks to the need to develop national sports policies that include Aboriginal peoples. The Jays Care Foundation's commitment to reconciliation and collaboration with Aboriginal communities augments this appeal by incorporating Indigenous values into their programming and operations that are culturally appropriate and respectful. Call to Action 91 advocates for a National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. It acknowledged the day by encouraging events at the Rogers Centre, and these honor the history and legacy of the residential schools, honor the survivors and families of survivors, and walk Indigenous youth through their programming. Through these, the Blue Jays signify their engagement in public awareness and advocacy for reconciliation. Commemoration. Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists Corey Parkin, the Mohawk artist, and Casey Bannerman, a Toronto-based artist, such collaborations being exactly what Call 83 encourages. These types of Indigenous-inspired jerseys become art for reconciliation, blending Indigenous language, cultures, symbols, and arts into a professional sporting brand created for a broad audience. This project raised awareness of Mohawk culture and history among thousands of fans while promoting the Mohawk language and design decisions in telling the Blue Jays story. The working and partnering key to projects that materialize funds to Indigenous communities Water First and Dreamcatcher Foundation, making it all real with respect to reconciliation rather than symbolic. Using Indigenous arts in mainstream sports culture, this Blue Jays integration became reconciliation in everyday life for Canadians, thereby affirming that joint art projects can work in raising awareness, education, and action. The artists. A Toronto-based artist, Casey Bannerman has gained fame by creating custom sports artwork and jerseys. Bannerman is not Indigenous but has collaborated respectfully with Indigenous partners on projects connected to reconciliation. His major notoriety has been for creating sport art projects that draw large numbers of spectators to have the initiatives transcend niche communities. Directly working with an Indigenous artist for the Blue Jays Indigenous jersey, instead of designing it himself, so there was a way to maintain cultural integrity and respect. His involvement further demonstrates how a non-Indigenous alike can assist properly when guided by Indigenous collaboration on several occasions. Indigenous heritage and territories. Corey Parkin is the collaborator of Bannerman and is a Mohawk of the Bay of Quinte. He resides on Tyendinaga Mohawk territory, which is a First Nation community in Ontario. Parkin possesses the Haudenosaunee-Iroquois Confederacy heritage connecting him to an ancient tradition of art, language, and storytelling. The lands in and around the Bay of Quinte have historical ties to treaties with the Mohawk chiefdoms, to stress the importance of territorial acknowledgement in this matter. Parkin's culture also influenced the decision to use Mohawk words on the jersey, basing the design within Indigenous language and worldview. Symbolism in the design. The jersey is dominated by the Mohawk word Karen-Pio, the original name of Toronto, meaning where there are trees standing in the water. Indigenous naming of the land is a definite reclamation for reminding the fans of the fact that the city and the team exist on Indigenous land. Indigenous words are used in synergy with modern branding when the word Terry Blue Jay in the Mohawk language adorns the jersey. Another important word is Kanranqua, meaning I love you, symbolizing community, love, and the interconnection of people, important values of the Mohawk culture. The design mixes Haida-style art and art style from a different indigenous group from the West Coast with the sports logo to forge a strong symbol of reconciliation, merging indigenous cultural forms. Marketing campaign info and educational, promotional events. The Indigenous-inspired Blue Jays jersey was launched as a special edition drop and quickly gained wide media attention, drawing both sports and mainstream coverage. The campaign emphasized education about Indigenous issues, particularly the ongoing clean drinking water crisis in many Indigenous communities, so the jersey became more than just merchandise. Promotional materials and interviews with the artists explain the meanings of the Mohawk words and design elements, giving fans cultural and historical context. The Blue Jays tied the jersey and similar initiatives to National Day for Truth and Reconciliation events at Rogers Center, which included land acknowledgments, Indigenous performances, and art installations. Use of funds and profits. Proceeds from the sale of the Indigenous-inspired Blue Jays jersey were donated to Water First, a charity which trains Indigenous youth to solve drinking water problems in their own communities. Funds were also allocated to the Dreamcatcher Foundation, which provides grants to Indigenous youth for sport, education, and cultural programs. Decisions regarding where to inject profits were made together by the artists Bannerman and Parkin after consultation with Indigenous organizations to ensure that the money really reached community needs. The intent was to link the profit giving directly to issues of clean drinking water and youth development, both very real issues for Indigenous communities, as opposed to merely symbolic gestures. Final response. We both stand with this initiative because it shows a real collaboration between Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists, as it represents reconciliation at work, instead of symbolic gestures. We feel that it was very powerful that the jersey incorporated Mohawk language and Indigenous symbolism, both educating the fans and honoring a proud culture in the process. One point of critique is that the Blue Jays could go one step further in embracing their Indigenous jersey as a regular alternate uniform instead of just a special edition drop. We feel this is a great step toward reconciliation, which should now be followed by long-term commitments and through Indigenous integration in the franchise. Sources used. The end. Thanks for watching.